You think you're invisible, doll? Think again. The old woman's voice, a dry rasp, made Emma's blood run cold. 1 minute she's clearing plates, the next she's a museum piece under a billionaire matriarch's gaze. A quarter-century secret hangs heavy in the air. The matriarch whispers about eyes, her daughter's eyes. The son, a titan of finance, just pales, collapses. See, they think Emma's just a waitress, scraping by. They're wrong. She's a fuse, about to ignite a truth they buried. A truth that could shatter their empire. They see a nobody. They have no idea how her quiet kindness will change everything. Especially him, the mighty Alistair Davenport, reduced to nothing. Ironic, isn't it? You think you're invisible, doll. Think again. The old woman's voice, a dry rasp, made Emma's blood run cold. 1 minute she's clearing plates, the next she's a museum piece under a billionaire matriarch's gaze. A quarter-century secret hangs heavy in the air. The matriarch whispers about eyes, her daughter's eyes. The son, a titan of finance, just pales, collapses. See, they think Emma's just a waitress, scraping by. They're wrong. She's a fuse about to ignite a truth they buried. A truth that could shatter their empire. They see a nobody. They have no idea how her quiet kindness will change everything. Especially him, the mighty Alistair Davenport, reduced to nothing. Ironic, isn't it? Emma traced the rim of a water glass, polishing away an invisible smudge. At 26, the Gilded Sparrow wasn't just a job. It was her sanctuary, a place where the clatter of silver, the murmur of conversations, and the precise placement of napkins formed a comforting, predictable rhythm. She carved her existence within these small actions, pushing away the anxieties of bills and the gnawing question mark that her future had become. Invisibility was her superpower, honed over years of navigating demanding customers and the silent scrutiny of the city's elite, a shield against a world that hadn't always been kind. Elena Davenport inhabited a world of curated elegance and whispered tragedies. For 25 years, the absence of her daughter Lillian had been a gaping wound, an ache she carried beneath layers of silk and diamonds. Her son, Alistair, driven by a grief he refused to acknowledge, built his empire with ruthless precision. Each deal, each acquisition, a brick in the wall he erected to contain the pain, to bury the past, and it was working. Right up until Tuesday. The lunchtime rush at the Gilded Sparrow surged around Emma like a controlled tide. She navigated its currents with practiced ease, anticipating needs, remembering preferences, a silent guardian of her section's tranquility. Table 9 beckoned, a secluded booth tucked away in a quiet corner. The Davenports. Even a waitress knew that name. Alistair, a man whose face graced the financial news, his features perpetually etched with a predatory hunger. A man who swallowed companies whole, and his mother Elena, a relic of old Boston money, her aura tinged with whispered stories of loss and heartbreak. "More coffee, madam?" Emma asked, her voice a gentle murmur, her smile calibrated for polite efficiency. Alistair, absorbed in his phone, barely registered her presence, his thumb swiping across the screen with dismissive haste. But Elena's gaze locked onto Emma's, and that was when the world seemed to tilt on its axis. The noise of the restaurant faded into a muffled hum. The pale, watery blue of Elena's eyes intensified, a sudden spark igniting within their depths. She leaned forward, her frail hand, adorned with perfectly manicured nails, gripping the edge of the mahogany table. Not just seeing, but studying, memorizing. An unsettling intensity settled over Emma. Alistair, roused by the unusual silence, lowered his phone, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. "Mother, we have a meeting. What is it?" But Elena remained transfixed. She saw the sweep of dark brown hair framing Emma's face, the gentle curve of her jaw, the subtle indentation of her chin, all features of no consequence to anyone but her. Then there were the eyes, hazel eyes shot through with golden green, eyes that held sunlight and shadows in perfect balance. Lillian's eyes. A ghost of a name, a whisper caught on the wind, escaped Elena's lips. Lillian. Time seemed to slow, stretching the moment into an eternity. Before Emma could formulate a response, Before Alistair could fully grasp his mother's strange behavior, Elelena's hand shot out, her fingers closing around Emma's wrist with surprising strength. The touch, cold and strangely desperate, sent a jolt of adrenaline through Emma's system. She felt trapped, exposed. The declaration hung in the air, bizarre and impossible. Other patrons began to stare, their hushed conversations dying away. Emma struggled to free her wrist, the water pitcher in her other hand suddenly feeling impossibly heavy, but the old woman's grip remained unyielding. "Mother, release her this instant. You're causing a scene." Alistair rose to his feet, his imposing figure looming over the table, casting a long shadow. He looked at Emma, really looked at her, for the first time. Saw the eyes his mother spoke of. Saw, too, the familiar structure of her face, the faint smile he thought he had seen only in his sister. He felt something crack deep within him. The blood drained from his face, leaving his skin a sickly pallor. The carefully constructed facade of control, the wall he had built to shut out the pain of the past, began to crumble. 25 years melted away, and he saw Lillian laughing in the garden. Lillian calling him a bore. Lillian storming out of the house. His breath hitched, his hand clutching at his chest, the expensive fabric of his suit suddenly constricting. He vaguely heard his mother still whispering the name Lillian as the room tilted around him, the faces of the other diners blurring into a sea of distorted shapes. He saw Emma's terrified expression. He saw Lillian's face. Then, with a strangled gasp, Alistair Davenport, the titan of finance, the man who never faltered, collapsed onto the floor, sending crystal glasses and silverware scattering across the polished wood. Chaos erupted. Elena screamed, a sound ripped from the depths of her grief. Emma stood frozen, her wrists still imprisoned in the old woman's grasp, her quiet, ordered world shattered into a million unrecognizable pieces. The shriek from Elena Davenport pierced through the cacophony of gasps and scraping chairs. Paramedics, summoned with impressive speed by the restaurant manager, swarmed the scene, their movements a flurry of efficient urgency. They shouted medical jargon that was as foreign to Emma as the idea that her eyes could fell a billionaire. Finally released from Elena's grasp, she stumbled back against a neighboring table, her mind reeling. A man in a dark suit materialized seemingly from nowhere, guiding Elena away from the scene. He spoke in hushed, soothing tones, but the old woman's gaze remained fixed on Emma, a desperate, burning intensity that followed her even as she was led out of the restaurant. He was good. She had noticed him, a man of shadow. Left standing amidst the wreckage, Emma felt the weight of 100 pairs of eyes upon her. She was no longer invisible. She was the epicenter of a disaster she couldn't comprehend. Soon the police arrived, followed by a man who introduced himself as Marcus Thorne, chief counsel for Davenport Industries. It was the same man who had escorted Elena away. His eyes were a cool, unsettling gray, missing any sort of emotional pull. His lips, thin and unyielding, looked as if they had never learned to smile. He questioned her in a clipped, professional tone, devoid of any warmth. "Name? Age? How long have you worked here? Did you know the Davenports?" "No, sir," she mumbled, her voice barely audible. I just served them coffee." He took her details, handed her a crisp business card, and warned her against speaking to the press. "We will be in touch," and he said. It wasn't a request. It was a statement of fact, heavy with unspoken implications. Numb and disoriented, Emma was sent home. The walk to her small apartment, normally a time for quiet reflection, was a blur of flashing lights and whispered judgments. She shared the cramped two-bedroom space with her best friend, Sophia Rossi, a vibrant art student who supplemented her income with portrait commissions. Sophia found her sitting on their lumpy sofa, staring blankly at the wall. What happened? The manager called, said there was an incident, and that you have the rest of the day off. You look like you've seen a ghost." Emma recounted the story in a disjointed stream of words. The elegant old woman, the cold billionaire, the grip on her wrist, the impossible declaration, the sudden collapse. Sophia listened, her usual boisterous energy subdued by concern. "Whoa, you have my daughter's eyes? That's straight out of a movie. Are you okay?" That must have been terrifying. It was surreal, Emma said, rubbing her wrist. The way she looked at me, Sophia, it wasn't just a compliment. It was like she was looking through me at someone else. And the son, he looked at me and just broke. The next 24 hours were a tense, unsettling limbo. Emma's phone buzzed incessantly with calls from her manager, who was fielding inquiries from reporters. Though the Davenport PR machine worked feverishly to suppress the story, whispers were already leaking out. Billionaire Alistair Davenport suffers massive coronary event at Gilded Sparrow. Mysterious waitress involved. The call from Marcus Thorne came the following afternoon. He requested a meeting, not at his office, but at a discreet suite in the Four Seasons Hotel. The implication was clear. This was not a matter for public record. It feels like you're walking into a spider's web, Elle, Sophia warned, her brow furrowed with worry. But Emma went anyway. She wore her nicest blouse and tried to project a confidence she didn't feel. The suite was breathtaking, offering panoramic views of the city she normally only saw from the ground up. Elena Davenport was seated on a plush velvet sofa, looking smaller and more fragile than she had in the restaurant. Her grief was a palpable presence in the room, thick and heavy. Marcus Thorne stood by the window, a silent sentinel in a gray suit. "Miss Vance," Elena began, her voice hoarse but surprisingly steady. "Thank you for coming. Please sit." Emma sat stiffly on the edge of an armchair. "My son Alistair is stable. The doctors say the event was brought on by extreme emotional distress. A shock to his system?" She paused, her pale blue eyes locking onto Emma's. "The shock, Miss Vance, was you." Emma swallowed hard. "I'm very sorry for what happened to your son, but I don't understand." 25 years ago, Elena said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, "I lost my daughter, Lillian. She was 22 years old, headstrong, beautiful, full of life. She had a falling out with the family, with her father and Alistair, about a man she was seeing, about her future. She walked out of our house one night, and we never saw her again." The pain in her voice was raw, ancient. Emma felt an involuntary pang of sympathy. "We hired investigators," Elena continued, "spent millions. There were leads that went nowhere, cruel hoaxes. After years, the police declared her legally dead. But I never believed it. A mother knows. I never felt it in my soul that she was gone from this earth." She leaned forward, her intensity returning. "When I saw you yesterday, I saw her. It wasn't just your eyes. It's everything. The way you stand, the shape of your face. You are the living image of my Lillian." Emma felt her head spin. "Mrs. Davenport, this is a mistake. I was born in Oregon. I was raised in the foster system. My parents, I never knew them. They died in a car accident when I was a baby. That's all I know." "Is it?" Marcus Thorne's voice cut in, smooth and sharp. He stepped forward, holding a thin file. "We took the liberty of doing some preliminary research, Miss Vance. Your history is sparse. You entered the Oregon foster system at 18 months old. The official report states you were found abandoned. The story of your parents dying in a car crash was something told to you by your first foster mother. There is no death certificate, no accident report, no record of a Vance couple who perished in that time frame and left behind a child." Emma's heart hammered against her ribs. "What are you saying?" "We are saying," Elena said, her voice trembling with the weight of her next words, "that we believe you are Lillian's daughter. We believe our daughter was pregnant when she disappeared." The air in the room grew thick, heavy with the enormity of the suggestion. Emma felt like she was drowning. Well, this was insane. A fantasy concocted by a grieving old woman. That's impossible," she stammered. "Is it?" Thorne countered. "Or is it an answer to a question you've had your entire life?" He had her there, the faceless ghosts of her parents, the gnawing emptiness of not knowing where she came from. It was the central void of her existence. Elena rose and walked over to Emma, her movements slow and deliberate. She didn't touch her, but stood so close Emma could smell her faint, lilac-scented perfume. "We want to know the truth," Elena pleaded, her composure finally cracking. Tears welled in her eyes. I have to know. I am an old woman, Miss Vance. I have lived a quarter of a century in a gray, sunless world. You are the first ray of light I have seen. Please. The raw desperation in her voice was devastating. Emma looked from Elena's tear-streaked face to Marcus Thorne's impassive one. She knew what was coming next. We are prepared to make you an offer, Thorne said, his tone all business again. Agree to a medically certified DNA test. While we await the results, which will be handled with the utmost discretion, we will deposit $100,000 into an account of your choosing. It is yours to keep, regardless of the outcome, to compensate you for this intrusion. Emma stared at him, speechless. $100,000, a sum so vast it was abstract. It would solve every problem she had and a dozen she hadn't even thought of yet. A golden key to a different life. And if... Emma's voice was a dry rasp. If it's a match? Elena answered, her voice soft but laden with promise. If you are my granddaughter, you will never have to worry about anything ever again. You will be a Davenport. It wasn't just an offer, it was a temptation, a way out of the daily grind, and a possible answer to the question that haunted her. But it was also terrifying. To be a Davenport, to be part of this family of tragedy and immense, suffocating wealth. It was a gilded cage, and the door was swinging open. I need to think, she said, finally finding her voice. Of course, Thorne said smoothly. He slid a piece of paper across the table. It was a non-disclosure agreement and the terms of their offer all laid out in neat legal type. My number's at the bottom. I'll expect your call. Emma walked out of the hotel and back into the sunlight of her own world, feeling like she had just visited another planet. In her pocket was a piece of paper that could change her life, or condemn it. The rhythm of her life was no longer a steady beat. It was the frantic, terrifying crescendo of an orchestra reaching its climax. The next 24 hours were a sleepless, nerve-shredding ordeal. Emma sat with Sophia in their tiny living room, the legal document spread on the coffee table like a sacred text. 100 grand just for a cheek swab? Sophia whistled, her eyes wide. Elle, that's insane. You could pay off my student loans, your debts. We could get a new apartment. You could quit that stupid job. It's not about the money, Emma said softly, tracing the embossed letterhead of Davenport Industries. Not really, it's... What if they're right? What does that even mean? My whole life, everything I thought I knew about myself would be a lie. Or, Sophia countered gently, it would be the truth, the real truth. You've always felt like a puzzle with a missing piece. Maybe this is it. The allure of that missing piece was undeniable. The next day, with a trembling hand, Emma called Marcus Thorne and agreed. The process was swift and sterile. A doctor with kind eyes and discreet manners met them at a private clinic. He took a swab from inside Emma's cheek and another from a willing, hopeful Elena. Alistair, still recovering in a private wing of Massachusetts General Hospital, had his sample provided by the hospital staff. The samples were sealed, labeled with anonymous codes, and sent to a top-tier genetics lab. The results would take a week. During that week, Emma's life was suspended in a strange, surreal bubble. The Davenports, true to their word, deposited the money. Seeing the number in her bank account felt like a typo. It didn't feel real. At their insistence, conveyed through Thorne, she took a leave of absence from the Gilded Sparrow. They didn't want her facing any more public scrutiny. Elena requested to see her again, not in a sterile hotel suite, but at the Davenport estate in Brookline, a sprawling mansion that looked more like a museum than a home. Emma, feeling like an imposter in her best dress, agreed. She found Elena in a sunlit conservatory filled with orchids of every imaginable color. The old woman was weaker now, leaning on a silver-handled cane, but her eyes were bright with a nervous energy. I wanted you to see this, Elena said, gesturing for Emma to follow her into a grand wood-paneled library. The walls were lined with books, but one wall was dedicated to family portraits. In the center was a large oil painting of a young woman. Emma gasped. It was like looking into a distorted mirror. The woman in the portrait had the same dark hair, the same jawline, the same mole beneath her left ear, but her expression was one of fiery defiance. a stark contrast to Emma's quiet composure. And her eyes? They were the same hazel eyes, but they blazed with a fierce, untamable spirit. "That's my Lillian," Elelanina said softly, her hand hovering near the canvas as if she could feel her daughter's warmth. She was painted that the summer she turned 21. She hated sitting for it, said it was a stuffy tradition for stuffy people. Over the next few hours, Elelanina painted her own portrait of Lillian with words. She wasn't just a ghost or a name. She became a person. Lillian was brilliant, passionate, and rebellious. She clashed terribly with her father, a stern patriarch who had since passed away, and with her older brother, Alistair. Alistair always followed the path, Elelanina explained, a sad smile on her face. Harvard, Wharton, then into the family business. He understood rules, structure, legacy. Lillian, she wanted to smash the structure. She volunteered at shelters, protested corporate greed, sometimes her own family's, and fell in love with a man we considered unsuitable. Who was he? Emma asked, captivated. His name was James. He was an artist, a musician. He had a brilliant mind and a beautiful soul, but not a penny to his name. My husband forbade her from seeing him. Alistair told her she was throwing her life away. The arguments were terrible. The last time I saw her, she had a terrible fight with Alistair. He called James a parasite. She said she'd rather live in a gutter with him than in this palace with them. Elelanina's voice broke. She screamed that she was leaving and never coming back. We thought she was being dramatic. We thought she'd cool off and call in a day or two. But she never did. The police investigated James, of course. He was heartbroken, devastated. He had no idea where she went. He said they had a plan to leave together, but she disappeared before they could. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the story hanging between them. Emma looked at the portrait again, at the defiant young woman who might be her mother. She felt a strange kinship, a flicker of that same rebellious spark inside her own chest. As Emma was leaving, Elelanina pressed a small velvet box into her hand. "This was hers. I want you to have it." Back in her apartment, Emma opened it. Inside lay a delicate silver locket tarnished with age. She carefully opened the clasp. On one side was a tiny faded photograph of Elelanina, looking much younger. The other side was empty. It was meant for a second picture, a picture that was never placed. Emma closed her hand around the cool metal, a tangible link to a past she was only just beginning to discover. Meanwhile, in his private hospital room, Alistair Davenport was awake and lucid. The news of the DNA test had been brought to him by Marcus Thorne. Alistair's reaction was not one of hope, but of a deep, unsettling dread. "What have you done, Marcus?" he rasped, his voice weak. Elelanina insisted. "After seeing the girl, there's no denying the resemblance." "Resemblance isn't proof," Alistair shot back, a flash of his old fire returning. "You've opened Pandora's box. Some things are better left buried." "Why?" Marcus asked, his curiosity piqued by his boss's strange reaction. "If she is Lillian's daughter, she's family. She's your niece." Alistair turned his head to stare out the window, his jaw tight. A shadow passed over his face, a flicker of an expression Marcus had never seen on him before. Pure, unadulterated fear. "You don't understand," Alistair said, his voice low and strained. "You have no idea what you've just unleashed." He wouldn't say more, retreating into a stony silence, leaving Marcus to wonder what part of Lillian's story had been left out of the official family narrative. What was Alistair so afraid of? The secret, it seemed, was not just that Lillian had a child. The secret was why she had run in the first place. And it was a secret Alistair Davenport had been guarding for 25 years. The week of waiting for the DNA results felt like a lifetime. Emma found herself living in a strange twilight world. No longer just a waitress, but not yet a Davenport. The $100,000 sat in her bank account, a figure so surreal it felt like play money. She paid off her modest debts and sent a generous check to her last foster mother, a kind woman who had always encouraged her to dream bigger. For the first time in her adult life, the crushing weight of financial insecurity was gone, replaced by a new, more complicated anxiety, the weight of expectation. She spent most of her time in the library, devouring old newspapers on microfilm, searching for any mention of Lillian Davenport's disappearance. The stories were brief, sanitized. Prominent Boston socialite vanishes, family pleads for privacy. There was no mention of a fight, no mention of a lover named James. The Davenport machine had scrubbed the narrative clean even back then. But as the days ticked by, a new, unsettling feeling began to creep into Emma's life. It started small, the feeling of being watched as she walked to the corner store. A black sedan parked across the street from her apartment building for 2 days straight, disappearing the moment she pointed it out to Sophia. "You're just paranoid," Sophia said, though her eyes darted nervously toward the window. "This whole thing is messing with your head." Perhaps it was. But then, one evening, as she was walking home from the library, the strap of her shoulder bag was suddenly yanked from behind. She stumbled, crying out as the bag was ripped from her grasp. A figure in a dark hoodie sprinted away down the street and vanished into an alley. It happened so fast she barely got a glimpse of him. Shaken and trembling, she filed a police report, but she knew it was useless. It was a simple mugging. It happened all the time in the city, except when she described the incident to Marcus Thorne during a routine check-in call. His reaction was anything but casual. It happened so fast she barely got a glimpse of him. Shaken and trembling, she filed a police report, but she knew it was useless. It was a simple mugging. It happened all the time in the city, except when she described the incident to Marcus Thorne during a routine check-in call. His reaction was anything but casual. "What was in the bag, Miss Vance?" he asked, his voice sharp. "Nothing important. My wallet, my keys, a library book. Oh, and the locket. The locket Mrs. Davenport gave me." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. The locket. Marcus's voice was tight with a new urgency. "Emma, I'm sending a car for you. I want you to pack a bag. You'll be staying at the hotel until the results come in. The Davenport suite, it's secure. Isn't that an overreaction? It was just a mugging. A mugger who ignored the $100 bill sticking out of your wallet and made sure to take a worthless old locket." "I don't think so," Marcus replied grimly. "Someone knows who you are, and they're sending a message." The move to the luxurious suite at the Four Seasons was jarring. One minute she was in her cozy, cluttered apartment. The next she was surrounded by marble silk and a level of security that was frankly terrifying. A plainclothes guard was stationed in the hall. Marcus explained it was a precaution. The incident with the locket had spooked him. It wasn't a random act, it was targeted. Why the locket had no monetary value. Its only value was sentimental and symbolic. It was a link to Lillian. Someone didn't want that link to be explored. His investigation, which had been a quiet background check, now kicked into high gear. He pulled the original, unredacted police file on Lillian's disappearance. Buried deep within the supplemental reports was a name that had been dismissed at the time: Richard Sterling. Sterling was a charismatic, ambitious young real estate developer. Back then, a rival to the early stages of Alistair's career. He had been charming, handsome, and utterly ruthless. Lillian had met him at a charity gala and had for a brief period been infatuated with him. The family, particularly Alistair, had detested him. The relationship had ended badly just a few months before she disappeared. According to the file, she had told a friend that Sterling scared her and that he was involved in shady deals. The lead was never pursued with any vigor. The Davenports had steered the police focus toward her artist boyfriend, James, and the theory that she had simply run away. On a hunch, Marcus ran a search on Richard Sterling's current activities. He was no longer just a developer. He was a magnet, a powerful, shadowy figure with a reputation for crushing his opposition. He was also known to employ a very discreet and very effective security team, one rumored to operate in the gray areas of the law. A chilling theory began to form in Marcus's mind. What if the family's narrative was wrong? What if Lillian wasn't running from her family but from Richard Sterling? Meanwhile, Emma, trapped in her gilded cage, felt a growing sense of dread. The world outside the panoramic windows seemed menacing. The stolen locket felt like a violation, a theft of a past she hadn't even had a chance to claim. She began to have strange, fragmented dreams. A dark car on a rainy night, the scent of pine trees, a woman's voice humming a lullaby. She almost recognized. They were wisps of memory too faint to grasp, but they left her with an aching sense of loss when she woke. The day the results were due, the atmosphere in the hotel suite was electric with tension. Elelenina arrived, her face pale, her hands trembling. Marcus Thorne stood by the window, his phone in his hand, waiting for the call from the lab's director. Emma just sat, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. The phone buzzed. Marcus answered, his expression unreadable. He listened for a long moment, saying only, "Yes, and I understand." He hung up and turned to face the two women. He took a deep breath. "The results are in," he said, his gaze settling on Emma. "The mitochondrial DNA is a perfect maternal line match to Elelenina Davenport." He paused, letting the words sink in. "It is a 99% probability," he declared, his voice leaving no room for doubt. "Emma Vance, you are the daughter of Lillian Davenport." A choked song escaped Elelenina's lips. She sagged with relief, tears of joy streaming down her face as she reached a trembling hand towards Emma. "My granddaughter," she wept, "my dear, dear girl." But Emma barely heard her. Her world had just tilted on its axis. It was true, all of it. The portrait, the eyes, the stories. She was a Davenport. The puzzle piece had been slammed into place, and the picture it created was overwhelming. She was no longer an orphan, a girl from nowhere. She had a history, a lineage, a family. And in that moment of stunning revelation, another piece clicked into place. The feeling of being watched, the black sedan, the mugger who stole not money, but a memory. It wasn't about the Davenports trying to find her. It was about someone who had known who she was all along. Someone who was terrified of her being found. Her appearance hadn't just dredged up a family's grief. It had disturbed a much darker, more dangerous secret. She looked at Marcus, whose grim expression told her he had reached the same conclusion. "Someone tried to keep this a secret, didn't they?" she asked, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. "Who are they? And what are they so afraid of?" The joy of discovery was instantly tempered by the cold chill of fear. Finding her family, it seemed, was only the beginning of the story. The real danger lay in uncovering why she was lost in the first place. The confirmation of Emma's identity sent ripples through the Davenport empire. But the most profound impact was felt in the sterile quiet of Alistair Davenport's private hospital room. Marcus Thorne delivered the news in person. He expected a complex reaction, but not the one he received. Alistair didn't show a flicker of joy or surprise. Instead, a heavy sigh escaped his lips, a sound of profound weariness, as if a sentence he had been dreading for years had finally been handed down. He closed his eyes, his face a mask of grim resignation. "So it's true," he whispered. "She's here, Alistair." "This is wonderful news," Marcus began. But Alistair cut him off with a sharp wave of his hand. "No, Marcus, it's not. It's a reckoning." He struggled to sit up, his movement stiff. "Get my mother on the phone. And the girl Emma, bring her here. Now there's something they both need to know. Something I should have said 25 years ago." An hour later, Emma and Elelenina were ushered into the hushed atmosphere of the hospital room. Seeing Alistair up close without his armor of corporate power was a shock. He looked older, smaller, haunted by something far deeper than his recent health scare. His gaze fell on Emma, and for the first time she saw not a cold billionaire, but a man drowning in regret. "Mother," he began, his voice raspy. "Emma, I have not been honest about the day Lillian left." Elena stiffened. "What are you talking about, Alistair? You had a terrible argument." She stormed out. "That's what you always said." "We did argue," he confirmed, his eyes fixed on a point on the far wall. "It was the worst one we ever had. I said horrible things. I called James a gold digger. I told her she was a disgrace to the family name. And she threw something at me. A vase. She screamed that she hated me. Hated all of us." He paused, swallowing hard. "But that's not the last time I saw her." The silence in the room was absolute. She came back. Alistair confessed, his voice dropping. "Later that night, long after you and Father had gone to bed, she snuck into my study. She was crying. She looked terrified. It wasn't about James. Not anymore. It was about someone else." He finally looked at them, his eyes filled with a quarter-century of guilt. It was Richard Sterling. She had been seeing him before James, and she had broken it off. but he wouldn't let her go. He was obsessed. She told me she had discovered something about him, that his real estate deals were a front, that he was laundering money for some very dangerous people. She said she had proof, a ledger she had copied from his office. Emma's blood ran cold. The name, Richard Sterling. The man Marcus was investigating. She said Sterling knew she had it. Alistair continued, his voice trembling. He had threatened her. He told her if she went to the police, she would disappear. She was petrified. She didn't know what to do. She was afraid to tell Father, afraid of what Sterling might do to James or to us. So she came to you. Elena breathed, her hand flying to her mouth. Alistair nodded, a single tear tracing a path down his gaunt cheek. She came to me, her big brother. And what did I do? I didn't believe the extent of it. I thought she was being dramatic, exaggerating to get back at me for the things I'd said. I saw him as a business rival, a snake, but not a monster. I told her to give me the ledger and I would handle it. I would use it as leverage to make him back off. He squeezed his eyes shut, but she wouldn't. She said she didn't trust me. She said I only cared about business and power. She said she needed to disappear to get away before he could find her. She begged me for money, cash, enough to start a new life somewhere far away. This was the moment that had haunted him, the decision that had broken him, and I gave it to her. He choked out. I went to the safe and I gave her $50,000. I told her to go to be safe and to call me when she got settled. I thought I was helping her. I thought I was protecting her and the family from scandal. My last words to her were not, "I love you" or "be careful." They were, Don't call the house. I'll give you a private number." I was already managing the fallout. He looked directly at Emma, his defenses completely gone. She walked out that door and I never heard from her again. For 25 years, I let you all believe she ran away because of a fight. But the truth is, I sent her away. I sent her into the night alone and terrified, running from a man I underestimated. I didn't protect her. I funded her disappearance. The reason for his collapse in the restaurant was suddenly brutally clear. It wasn't just the shock of seeing a ghost. It was the crushing, instantaneous weight of his failure. In Emma's face, he hadn't just seen his lost sister. He had seen the living embodiment of his guilt. The proof that Lillian hadn't just run away to be a free spirit. She had been a terrified mother-to-be, and he had sent her into the jaws of danger. Elena let out a gut-wrenching sob, a sound of pure, unadulterated anguish. Not for a lost daughter, but for a terrified one. She never knew she had. She stumbled toward Alistair's bed, her anger and grief wearing on her face. Emma stood frozen, the pieces of her life slotting into a horrifying mosaic. Her mother wasn't a reckless runaway. She was a woman in fear for her life, trying to protect her unborn child. She hadn't abandoned her. She had been running to save her. And the man she was running from, Richard Sterling, was still out there. A powerful, ruthless man who had already threatened her mother. A man who now knew that Lillian Davenport's daughter, the one loose end he probably thought was long gone, had just been found. The theft of the locket wasn't a warning. It was a promise. He was coming to finish what he started. Marcus, Emma said, her voice cutting through the family's grief with newfound clarity and strength. The mugging Sterling knows. He knows I'm here. Alistair's head snapped up a new kind of fear. Fear for Emma eclipsing his guilt. "My God," he whispered. "What have I done?" He hadn't just opened Pandora's box. He had painted a target on his niece's back. Alistair's confession transformed the landscape of the mystery. It was no longer a family tragedy. It was a criminal investigation. The full, terrifying resources of the Davenport family, which had once been used to suppress the story, were now unleashed to uncover the truth. Alistair, energized by a potent cocktail of guilt and a desperate need for redemption, directed the operation from his hospital bed. Marcus Thorne became the field marshal. He hired a team of the best private investigators money could buy, ex-FBI agents and forensic accountants who operated with surgical precision. Their target, Richard Sterling. They worked out of a secure suite at Davenport Tower, the walls covered in timelines, photographs, and connection charts. Emma was at the center of it all. She was no longer a passive participant. The vague, wispy dreams she'd been having began to coalesce into something more tangible as she was surrounded by the details of her mother's life. The smell of pine, she told Marcus one afternoon, staring at a map of New England in rain. A lot of rain. I remember being cold wrapped in a blanket that smelled like my mother's perfume. Lilac. The investigators cross-referenced weather patterns and geography from 25 years ago. A prolonged storm system had hit northern Vermont and New Hampshire in the weeks following Lillian's disappearance. It was a thread. They dove into Sterling's financials from that era. The forensic accountants peeled back the layers of shell corporations and offshore accounts. They found it a series of structured, untraceable payments to a holding company linked to known fixes men who made problems disappear permanently. The payments started a week after Lillian vanished. While the investigation raged, Emma focused on the personal. With Elena, she went through boxes of Lillian's belongings that had been stored in the mansion's attic for decades. They found diaries filled with angry, passionate poetry, sketchbooks filled with drawings of James the artist, and photo albums. As they flipped through a worn leather album, Emma's breath caught. She pointed to a candid snapshot taken at what looked like a lakeside cabin. Lillian was in the foreground, laughing her back to the camera. But behind her, leaning against a tree, was a man in the shadows. He was handsome, slick, with a confident smirk. On the little finger of his right hand, he wore a distinctive gold ring with a black onyx stone. "Who is that?" Emma asked. Elena squinted. "Oh, that's Richard Sterling. Lillian brought him to the lake house once, long before James. I never liked him. He had cold eyes." Emma stared at the ring. A jolt, powerful and visceral, shot through her. A fragmented memory, sharper than any before, surfaced. She was very small, sitting in a car seat. It was dark. A man's face was leaning in. He wasn't smiling. He was wearing that ring. The onyx stone caught the dim light of the dashboard. He was saying something to her mother, his voice a low, menacing hiss. Her mother was crying, telling him to stay away from her baby. "The ring," Emma whispered, her hand trembling as she pointed to the photo. "I remember the ring. The memory was the key. It placed Sterling with Lillian after she had left Boston. He had found her." The investigators, armed with this new information, focused their search on properties owned by Sterling or his associates in northern Vermont in that specific time frame. They found one, a secluded hunting cabin near the Canadian border, purchased through a shell company and sold a year later. As they were digging, a package arrived at the hotel for Emma. It was a small padded envelope with no return address. The security team scanned it and found nothing dangerous. Inside was a single Polaroid photograph. It was old and slightly faded. It showed a young woman, Lillian, handing a swaddled baby to another woman outside a small clapboard church. Lillian looked exhausted and frightened, but her expression as she looked at her child was one of fierce, heartbreaking love. On the back of the photo, written in a shaky hand, were 3 words: St. Jude's Danville. It was a message from the past, a final breadcrumb left by a mother who knew she might not survive. Danville was a tiny, forgotten town in the northeast corner of Vermont. Marcus and a shaken Emma, flanked by security, drove there immediately. St. Jude's was a small, weathered church, exactly as it appeared in the photo. The priest was long dead, but the church records were meticulous. They found what they were looking for in the baptismal registry from 25 years ago. Emma Vance, parents deceased, godmother Catherine Ali. Catherine Ali. The name resonated with Marcus. She had been on the periphery of their investigation, a former housekeeper for the Davenports, who had quit suddenly around the time Lillian disappeared. They had her last known address, a small town in Oregon. The picture was now terrifyingly complete. Lillian, knowing Sterling was closing in on her, had made a desperate plan. She drove to Danville and gave her most precious possession, her daughter, to the one person she trusted implicitly, her former housekeeper, Catherine. She must have given Catherine the cash Alice Teaster had provided, telling her to disappear and raise the child under a new name. The story of the car crash was a fiction created to protect Emma from anyone who might come looking. The Polaroid was Lillian's final act, proof of what she had done, a message she hoped would one day be found. After handing over her baby, Lillian Davenport, now alone, had turned to confront her tormentor. Armed with nothing but a ledger and a mother's courage, and she had never been seen again. The investigators searching the property records of the hunting cabin found their final grim piece of evidence. The cabin had been raised in a fire a few months after Lillian's disappearance. The official cause was listed as an electrical fault, but one of the ex-FBI agents on Marcus's team found an old forgotten witness statement from a local hunter who reported seeing a dark sedan with Massachusetts plates leaving the property at high speed on the night of the fire. There was no longer any doubt. Richard Sterling hadn't just threatened Lillian, he had hunted her down, and he had silenced her. Just as Marcus was relaying this information over the phone to a horrified Alistair, his lead investigator burst into the room. "We have a problem," he said, his face grim. "Sterling just landed his private jet at a small airfield 20 miles from Boston. He's off the grid." In our surveillance on Emma's old apartment, the unit across the hall was just rented 2 days ago under a false name. The tenant fits the description of one of Sterling's top security men. He hasn't been targeting Emma. He's been waiting for her to go home. Emma, overhearing this, felt a paralyzing fear. Sophia was still there. Sterling, unable to get to Emma in her fortress, was going to use her friend as bait. The drive back to Boston was a blur of dread. The investigators' discovery was terrifyingly clear. Richard Sterling knew who Emma was, and he was using her friend Sophia as bait. He had a man in the apartment across the hall waiting for Emma to walk into his trap. Dismissing Marcus's vehement protests, Emma insisted on being the one to walk in. She would wear a wire. It was an incredible risk, but it was the only way to ensure Sophia's safety. This was her fight. It had been her fight since the day she was born. Taking a steadying breath, she entered the apartment. The scene was chillingly quiet. Sophia sat on the sofa, her face pale with terror. Behind her stood Richard Sterling, impeccably dressed, a predatory smile on his face. On his finger, the gold and onyx ring gleamed. "Emma," he purred, "I'm so glad you could join us. The resemblance to your mother is truly uncanny." "Let her go," Emma demanded, her voice cold. Sterling sneered his arrogance, overriding his caution. "Your mother was foolish. She had something of mine and chose to protect a silly ledger over her own life and yours. A pointless gesture. He was trying to poison Lillian's memory, but Emma felt only a surge of strength. She looked him in the eye, her voice clear and strong. "Her story's going to be told," she said, delivering the prearranged distress signal. "It's over." Sterling laughed and revealed a pistol pressed discreetly to Sophia's side. "It's over when I say it is." In that instant, the world erupted. The front door and windows shattered as the tactical team crashed in from 2 directions. Sophia, seizing the moment, threw herself to the floor. Sterling snarled, raising his weapon toward Emma in a final desperate act. Before he could fire, a single deafening shot echoed from the doorway. Alistair Davenport stood there, flanked by Marcus, a handgun held steady. Sterling crumpled, clutching a wound in his shoulder. For Lillian, Alistair stated, his voice flat with finality. In the aftermath, Sterling's empire crumbled. Faced with overwhelming evidence and Alistair's testimony, he confessed everything. Investigators excavated the site of the burned-down cabin and finally found Lillian's remains. Lillian Davenport, no longer a vanished socialite, but a courageous mother, was finally laid to rest with the honor she deserved. Life for Emma was irrevocably changed. She was an AYS, but the wealth was secondary to her purpose. She established the Lillian Davenport Foundation, a charity dedicated to helping women and children in crisis. The Davenport family was not magically healed, but it was whole. Alistair found redemption in his work for the foundation, and Elela Nena found peace in the presence of her granddaughter. Emma, finally understanding her past, was no longer a ghost of her mother, but the living legacy of her courage. She was home. This incredible story shows us that the past is never truly gone. It lives on in the secrets we keep in the faces of strangers and in the undeniable pull of family. Emma's journey from a humble waitress to the heir of a powerful legacy is a testament to the fact that our identity is so much more than our circumstances. It's a story of a mother's ultimate sacrifice, a family's painful reckoning with the truth and the discovery that finding where you come from can finally show you where you're meant to go. If this story of fate, secrets, and the unbreakable bond of family touched your heart, Please let us know in the comments below. What part of the story shocked you the most? Your engagement helps our channel grow and bring more stories like this to light. Don't forget to hit that like button. Share this video with someone who loves a story of profound mystery and emotion. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell so you never miss our next incredible real-life drama. Thank you for listening.